And let's get started. Good morning. My name is John Stotz. I'm the Director of Adult Faith Formation here at Christ the King Catholic Church in Nashville, Tennessee. Very excited about this and our next week's session. But before I introduce today's speaker, I wanted to say a little bit about our initiative and how these two sessions fit into it. Last June, on the heels of the murder of George Floyd and the ensuing demonstration and protests, parishioners at Christ the King gathered virtually for a number of listening sessions entitled Why Black Lives Matter to help us sort through what was going on and where our place was in the upheaval. And out of these listening sessions came what we've come to call Christ the King's Anti-Racism Initiative, which is really just a collective of folks who are working on various projects meant to advance our understanding of racial justice in the Catholic Church, both theoretically and practically. It's meant to help us understand why the struggle against racism is not only a matter of justice, but also a matter of Catholic identity. And so we started with two foundational sessions, rooting anti-racism in the Eucharist, and then rooting it in Scripture, which we did last week. Today, we begin the process of zooming in on the history to find our place, as the series title is called, the place of the Church in the story of race. And so our speaker today is going to help us over the next 2 weeks. And then the Thursday night after that, you can look at the calendar, we'll have someone from the Tennessee Historical Commission to talk about a different part of our history, the construction of I-40 and its impact on North Nashville. This series is being recorded and will be available on our website. If you prefer that I remove any identifying information, your name or your photo, I can do those in the videos, but really we're featuring our speakers. So before I introduce today's speaker, I do want to make a plug. As one of our anti-racism projects, one working group began a dialogue with members of St. Vincent de Paul in North Nashville on how we can walk together in our faith journey as parishes to proclaim the kingdom of God. And that's been very promising, as I've heard from this group. One of their ongoing ministries is an annual food drive on Thanksgiving, where they provide the less fortunate members of their own community with boxes of food. Last year, they gave out about 200 boxes. This year, obviously, between the tornado and the pandemic, the need is even greater. So we have offered to help them in providing these boxes for their community. So if you're able, and I'm going to send out an email to the wider list tomorrow about this with the details, but consider making a donation either by check or cash to this. These donations, again, are going to go toward providing boxes so that folks can have Thanksgiving meals. They work with Second Harvest Food Bank, which is local and trustworthy. And I'll, again, provide some details, but I wanted to put in a plug. We're really hoping to build a bridge with this community, and we figured one way to start is just to participate in one of their outreach ministries. And there will be more opportunities of this in the future. So stay tuned for that. Okay, today's speaker is a priest of this diocese, but the resident of another. I actually first met Msgr Campion in Huntington, Indiana, where he resides and works, when I was in the habit of getting breakfast with my pastor and then employer at Nick's Kitchen, which is famous for its pork tenderloin sandwiches. As often as not, there would be this other respectable gentleman in a collar eating in a nearby booth, and Father Ron would invite him over to join us, and he would regale us of tales from the latest of local church politics, Nashville, Rome, the world, and I didn't know that our paths would intersect some 15 years later, but here we are. Monsignor, is there anything you want to say about yourself before we get started? You'll need to unmute, Monsignor.
Okay, can you hear me?
Can hear you now.
I'm a native of Nashville. My parents were natives of Nashville. I went 8 years to Overbrook School, 4 years to Father Ryan, and then to St. Bernard College in Alabama. I did my theology at St. Mary's Seminary in Baltimore. was ordained May the 21st, 1966, and then went back to Catholic University. I also went to Vanderbilt for a few summers for work in Southern history. So then I came here in 1988. As John said, I'm still a priest of the Diocese of Nashville, but I've been living in the Diocese of Fort Wayne, South Bend since 1988. My interest in history of the church in Tennessee really began with history of Tennessee, and then the history of the church. When I was in the seminary, I was always assigned several summers to the Tennessee Register. Monsignor George Flanagan was editor of the Register, and he was kind of the last word in Tennessee Catholic history. So I worked with him, and that developed the interest. So that's what I'd want to say about myself. Now, the way I want to handle these two sessions is talk about two bishops in our history in the diocese who had a great effect upon the matter of race. The first one was Bishop Thomas Sebastian Byrne. We've had 12 bishops, by the way. Bishop Spalding is the 12th, but I'm speaking about Bishop Thomas Sebastian Byrne, and then next week I'll talk about Bishop Joseph Aloysius Durick. Well, let's start with Bishop Byrne. Here's some, I don't want to make it too tedious with numbers, but he was born July the 28th, 1841 in Hamilton, Ohio. His grandparents were Irish immigrants. He was a native born, as were his parents. He was ordained a priest for the Archdiocese of Cincinnati on May the 22nd, 1869. Ordained and installed as Bishop of Nashville on July 24, 1894, and died in the Cathedral Rectory down on West End Avenue on September the 4th, 1923. His schooling was in Cincinnati, and then for theology, he went to Rome. And he was utterly and absolutely bewitched by Rome. No other way to put it. In every facet, he was ordained over there, and he celebrated his first Mass at a church called San Martino di Monte, not too far from the Rome Railroad Station, the Terminale. And the Cathedral of the Incarnation is built to be a replica of San Martino. And there's a custom among the Tennessee Nashville seminarians over there, not always honored, but some. I'm thinking of Father Andy Bulso, for example. They are ordained a deacon over there, and the next day they have a Mass of Thanksgiving. Well, often they have it at San Martino because of Bishop Byrne's connection. The resemblance between San Martino and the Cathedral of the Incarnation today, you have to sort of stretch your imagination, because the cathedral has been renovated and remodeled a number of times. But anyway, the Cathedral Rectory in Nashville, there at the corner of 20th and West End, is a replica of the French embassy to the Holy See. And so he was really taken with Rome. And that, I think, had a bearing on some of the things I'll discuss with you. He evidently was certainly among the best and the brightest as a student and as a young priest. He translated theological books from Italian or Latin into English, and he evidently was pretty smart. The Archbishop of Cincinnati recognized that, and when Byrne was a very young priest, he began to take Father Byrne to meetings of the American bishops. And that, I think, was important in Byrne's outlook because it introduced him to the hierarchy. He was a Roman student, and he already would have had associations with men who were climbing the ladder. He mixed very much with the hierarchy. Cardinal John Farley of New York was a great friend of his and a great contributor, by the way, to the construction of the Nashville Cathedral, the Archdiocese of New York. Now to a little bit about his personality. He was not the kind of person you'd want to be around, frankly. He was very brittle, imperious, knew everything, could be quite mean. He got into a clash with Cardinal James Gibbons of Baltimore, to sort of tell you the kind of personality he had. I won't go into what it was all about, but nothing that you'd really be ashamed of. But anyway, and Gibbons was the wrong man to cross because he was really the American Pope. And that probably kept Byrne from moving up the ladder in the hierarchy. But Byrne could be very small. And for example, they had a big thing in Knoxville called the Appalachian Exposition. And it was a big thing. And civic group, Rotary Club or whatever, I guess if they sold the tickets or made a donation or whatever, but they could have the day. And as part of the day at noon, they would have a speaker. They'd bring in a speaker. Well, the Knights of Columbus sold the tickets or whatever they had to do. So the day was, they got a day, and they invited Cardinal Gibbons, who was the leader of the American hierarchy, down from Baltimore to speak. And that was a great coup. So he came. So, of course, Byrne back in Nashville knew he was coming. So Cardinal Gibbons, they put him up at the Farragut Hotel on Gay Street over there, which is at the time the finest hotel in Knoxville. And Father John Graham, who was the pastor of Immaculate Conception in downtown Knoxville, still very much a standing and active parish, went to the Farragut to pay his respects to the Cardinal. And so the Cardinal received him, and the Cardinal said, "Father, your church is downtown here. I want to say Mass in your church in the morning." And Father Graham fumbled and fidgeted and so forth. And finally, he just broke down. He just sobbed. And the Cardinal said, "Father, what in the world is wrong? What is wrong?" And Father Graham said, "Your Eminence, I don't know what to tell you, but I have a letter from Bishop Byrne that I am not to allow you inside Immaculate Conception Church, let alone say Mass." And so the Cardinal said, "Well, Father, I will be at your church in the morning at 7 o'clock, and I will celebrate Mass. Don't you worry, I'll take care of your bishop." So Gibbons was there the next morning and said Mass, but that sort of gives you something of the personality of Bishop Byrne. As far as his attitude, some of this is, speculation, I guess you would say. But I think as far as African Americans are concerned, this would have been a factor. He was born in Southern Ohio. He was 20 when the Civil War began. And so that is a rather young, impressionable age. He was going to the seminary, but his contemporaries all would have gone into the Union Army. There was a lot of fervor in that part of Ohio, a lot of fervor for abolition. It was a real spot for the Underground Railroad. That is where, by the way, today the Underground Railroad Museum is located in Cincinnati. So he had that background. Part of that would have been not exactly a total affection for Tennessee, or the South. That was the way it was perceived. He was never regarded as part of Nashville. The historian Thomas Stritch writes in his book that he was never, in 29 years, Bishop Byrne was never a resident of the city, but just a longtime visitor. He did not mix with the people, did his job, but certainly never considered him a part of the community in that sense. And they didn't regard him as part of a community. My dad used to tell the story that his mother, my grandmother, went to some event. The bishop was there and he spoke. He never caught on to the social mores and the culture of the South. And my grandmother came home and said, I declare, God bless me for saying this, God forgive me, but I do believe the bishop is a Republican. And because there were no Republicans in Tennessee at that time. When he died, to complete this little comment of that part of his personality, he specified in his will, I do not want to be buried in Nashville. And so his body was taken back to Cincinnati and he was buried there. The Nashville Cathedral has no crypt or funeral chapel or anything like that. And it was said among the priests at that time that it was because since he didn't want to be buried there, he didn't want any other bishop to be buried there. The cathedrals in Knoxville and Memphis, they have funeral chapels or whatever for bishops, but not Byrne. He very much was a part of the American hierarchy, even though he had this quarrel with Gibbons. And that would have included an awareness of some of their positions, which would have been in 1866, after the war, the American bishops met in Baltimore and said that they would establish as a priority the evangelization of Blacks. Well, that never really was pursued as a national agenda. There were certain people who pursued it, but it was never really pursued. But I would suspect that Byrne knew about it, and they said that he had a great sense of that and a great yearning to evangelize African Americans. Now, he would put through programs, and to hell with the way the people felt. He was headstrong. He was damn the torpedoes, and he would just move ahead. And for example, when he bought that land out there on West End Avenue where the cathedral still stands, that was very much opposed by the people of Nashville for the simple reason they said he's putting the cathedral on a farm. And but he didn't care. He went on and bought the land and built the cathedral. Well, anyway, that's sort of his personality. Now, I wanted to go from that to some of the background of that might have had an effect. And that was that, first of all, Tennessee itself, Tennessee was part of the colony of the British colony of North Carolina. And Britain had in the colonies, whether it be what became the United States or the Caribbean, Jamaica, Barbados, Trinidad, and so on, the colonies, not in the mother country itself, but in the colonies, slavery was legal until 1839. And so it was legal. For example, in North Carolina, Tennessee separated from North Carolina and became the 16th state in 1796. And it was but it retained the custom of slavery. And then another thing, people don't realize this: slavery was not Southern law, although most of the slaves are in the South, but it was American law. You read the Constitution, you read decisions of the Supreme Court and all sorts of congressional actions and so forth. It was a federal institution. And so slavery was legal in Tennessee until December the 31st, 1865. Now, with all deference to Abraham Lincoln, the Emancipation Proclamation was selective, and it only freed slaves in certain areas, and others it kept in bondage. I wrote a column, Jim, for our Sunday Visitor one time about this. Some guy shot me a letter, reader, the very idea I defamed the great emancipator and so forth. And I answered, read the document. Just Google Emancipation Proclamation, and you will see the states that are exempted, and they would still have slavery today, theoretically. Tennessee was one of them. Lincoln did not, this is whatever occupying military force you're talking about, they did not want to have to use troops to maintain order in occupied territories when they needed them at the front. And so parts of Virginia were exempted, Louisiana, and all of Tennessee, plus the Union states, which were slave states, Missouri, Kentucky, Maryland, and Delaware. Their slaves were untouched. But then the 13th Amendment to the Constitution, after Lincoln's death, after the war, after the Confederacy, the 13th Amendment was adopted, took effect on December 31st, 1865, at which time slavery became illegal in the whole country. So we had no more slaves in Tennessee. But that was not the end of the story. Tennessee very definitely had Southern tendencies. I'll just mention about Nashville, since we're talking about Nashville and Middle Tennessee. 3 of the Confederate states, 3 of the 11, in none of the states, by the way, was secession just an uprising. In every one of the states, there was an organized constitutional process to secede. The U.S. Constitution was moot on the subject. I'm not defending anybody, but these things that Robert E. Lee and Jefferson Davis and so forth were traitors, that's utterly ridiculous, because there's nothing in the American Constitution to this day that says a state cannot secede. Doesn't say the other way either. But what the states would do through some constitutional process would discuss and act on the matter of secession. 8 of the states called constitutional conventions. 3 of the states, Virginia, Tennessee, and Texas, put the question to the people. So, for example, if you want to know how public opinion in Georgia, how did it shake out as far as secession, you have to sort of thread it together, who was elected to the convention and all that. But you can go, for example, to Virginia, Tennessee, and Texas, and you can find out exactly how the population voted. The point I'm making is that the Middle Tennessee Grand Division, only 2 counties out of whatever it is, 33 or something, 2 counties voted for the Union. Macon, which would be Lafayette, and Wayne County, which would be Waynesboro. The other counties voted significantly for secession. Davidson went 7-1 in behalf of the Confederacy. It was overwhelming in Sumner County, where Gallatin is, Wilson County, where Lebanon is, Rutherford, Williamson, Murray, Giles, Montgomery. these counties, the votes in favor of the Confederacy were just amazingly high. Memphis, by the way, which is not part of the conversation, our conversation, but Memphis, Shelby County, voted 15-1 for the Confederacy. Now, what I'm saying in all of this is that this was the attitude. The war came and went, but there was that attitude, and it would have much involved slavery. Then following the war, after the war, then came Reconstruction, and after that, the Jim Crow laws. Now, I don't see anybody on this screen who is old enough to have remembered segregation, but it was just absolutely affected every aspect of life, and not only say blacks and whites couldn't go to school together, Catholics could not be buried at Calvary Cemetery. That was in the law. And then as far as the etiquette is concerned, it was just pervasive. You never shook the hand of a black person. You never even took a glass of water at the same table as a black person. Went on and on and on. Another thing, Jim, I'll tell you this, since you've been in journalism, we had a thing at Ryan, a play that we put on, and my mother was asked to do the publicity, and she called the Banner, and they said, well, I don't know, are you going to have any pictures of whatever, something? Then she said, well, I don't know. And they said, well, you know, the Banner does not publish pictures of black people. That was the afternoon newspaper. Some of you may not know, Jim O'Hara would remember, but that was the afternoon paper. And Jim, the Banner, that's in my lifetime. The Banner would not publish a photograph that had a black in it. What did this produce? It produced a separation, and from that came a distancing, and that is a burden that still lives with us. And I would encourage you in your project there at Christ the King to remember that the distancing between the races is still extraordinarily real and has great impact. What about the church? When the spat was going on a couple of months ago about the name Father Ryan High School, Jim O'Hara and I had some conversation. Somebody suggested to me, sent me an email, a Nashville friend, we ought to drop the name Ryan and name the school Bishop Miles High School after the first bishop. And I emailed back, you better rethink that, because he owned 6 slaves personally. The diocese owned slaves. Convents owned slaves. So that was the record of the church, by the way, in Tennessee. What about the lessons they'd learned in school as far as the catechism? The number of popes over the centuries spoke about slaves, either blacks or indigenous people. And it was always in terms of no mistreatment, no inhumanity. But it was not, listen to this, it was not until 1888 in a papal encyclical by Leo XIII that the Catholic Church stated that slavery is wrong. And it brought down the Brazilian government, by the way. I don't mean it, the government changed hands, but the whole Brazil was a constitutional monarchy, and it swept everything out and became a republic. It was a major thing simply because the leadership of the Brazilian monarchy supported the Pope. Well, they had to go. And as late as 1866, the Vatican, through the Holy Office, as it was called in those days, stated that slavery is not against divine law. So that was the picture of Catholics. So Byrne comes in, and he would have been dealing with that kind of attitude, cultural attitude, certainly in Nashville, but he went ahead. He in 1900, he got the Josephite priests from Baltimore, and they were formed, fascinatingly enough, by a British cardinal, Cardinal Vaughan of Westminster, London. They he got them to agree to send a priest to Nashville to take care of blacks. Well, the first one was a man by the name of Father Thomas J. Plunkett. And he came down, he found one Catholic black in the city of Nashville that he was able to locate. Byrne, however, felt that was a good enough foundation to start. And he bought the Second Presbyterian Church, which would be, I was trying to think today exactly where it would have been. I've seen it. Probably about the site of the Metro Auditorium down there, in that area down below the Capitol to the east of the Capitol. The church had been built in 1846. It was said to have been designed by William Strickland, who was the architect for the state capitol. But Byrne bought it and named it Holy Family Church. And that functioned as the Catholic Church for blacks until 1909, when it was moved to, when the Drexel property became available out there on Lafayette. He met, I told Beth Lyle earlier, he met Catherine Drexel, Mother Catherine Drexel, by chance in Santa Fe, New Mexico. And Bishop Byrne, by the way, was a great one for spending vacations in more favorable climates. So in the winter, he would go to Mexico, New Mexico, or wherever. And then in the summers, he went to Newport, Rhode Island. Well, he ran into her in New Mexico because she was starting a facility there for Indians. And they started talking. She became interested in Nashville. And as I may have mentioned what she would do, she would go in to an area and she'd do everything with her own money. She would buy the land and build the buildings and maintain them and whatever. And she did that all across the South. Well, they moved Holy Family Parish to that location. They are right, that roundabout out there at 8th Avenue and Lafayette was right there. And of course, the roundabout was not there in any event. She did everything, supplied all the money. So he had that. He also was interested in something in Memphis. He founded a parish there, St. Anthony's. And then he was interested in Jackson, Tennessee, about halfway between Nashville and Memphis, and he founded St. Joseph's Parish there. I don't know why he didn't get Mother Drexel's nuns in Jackson to run the school at St. Joseph's, but he didn't. Maybe he didn't ask them. And the St. Cecilia Dominicans took over that school. Well, wait, I can get this page. What effects did all this have on Catholics? I think this is interesting after all these this trivia that I've given you. Is there was an attitude, first of all, that really does not exist that much anymore, that whatever the bishop said was okay. Nobody really fought him. As I said at the earlier thing, the Nashville Catholic population did not really regard him as he was not beloved. He was not hated, but he was not beloved. He was not part of the city and didn't want to be. But they didn't really oppose him. So if he wanted to, have these facilities for blacks, that was all right. And remember, everything was so tightly regulated by the Jim Crow laws. So you really would not have encountered, whites would not have encountered blacks, vice versa, other than through the process of employment. And so it really didn't upset a lot of Catholics in Nashville who were not white that he started Holy Family Parish, or that they had a Immaculate Mother or whatever. I guess you could say they tolerated it. There was a missionary spirit at the time. He was very much taken by that, and he picked that up probably in Rome. His feeling about blacks certainly did not probably originate in Rome, because Italy was as much in the colonial business at that time as France and England, Britain. Italy had its colonies, Libya and Eritrea and Somalia. So he wouldn't have found an anti-colonial spirit in Rome, but he would have found, both in Rome and from his Irish ancestors, a great missionary spirit. And I think that affected him a lot in many ways. He was after all is said and done, and I've not been too kind to him this morning, but he was a remarkable man. I mean, he spotted needs, and he just bullheadedly went to them. And for example, the aged poor who had nowhere to go, he got the Little Sisters of the Poor in Nashville. He got some going in Memphis. They had a problem of young women living on the street and being involved in all sorts of immoral things and so forth. He got the Sisters of the Good Shepherd into Memphis for them. He supported St. Mary's Orphanage in Nashville, St. Peter's Orphanage in Memphis. If you got sick in those days, you were in bad shape. You could have a doctor, but there was you couldn't get nursing care. Well, he had a broad outlook of the church in this country. I mean, he knew what was where and who was what. And he got the Daughters of Charity to come in and start St. Thomas Hospital in Nashville. He already inherited St. Joseph's Hospital in Memphis. He got the Daughters of Charity to come in, and the hospital is named St. Thomas in honor of, guess whom? His patron saint. And then he started St. Mary's, or the groundwork for St. Mary's Hospital in Knoxville. And his idea was that Catholics would be taken care of under the umbrella of the church from womb to tomb, regardless of their means. And then schooling, he provided that. Some of his plans didn't work out. He wanted a Catholic college in Nashville, dreamed of that. And he got the New Orleans Jesuits to agree to build a 4-year college. And they came up and they bought land. The land was on just there at the forks of 70 and 100, Highway 70 and 100, on Highway 100, I guess. There's a little shopping center there right behind Cheekwood. Well, the Jesuits bought that land, and that was a big deal for my father, because the college was to be called Campion College after the Jesuit martyr. And Dad, I don't know ever came of it, but Dad had the clipping Jim, from the Tennessean announcing the foundation of Campion College. Well, various things happened, First World War being one. But his idea was that a Catholic would live in security and dignity, womb to tomb, very much connected with the church, and the church would provide it. So as I said, I've been a bit unkind to him about his personality, but he did great things. Back to the effects of Catholics, I mentioned it was sort of tolerance, and always, and I would encourage you folks to think about this, always, 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 the effects of distancing and separation. Secondly, the second point I would make would be that Catholics, I guess anywhere actually, unless the culture has been totally overtaken by Catholicism, as it was at one time in Spain and France and so on. But Catholics absorbed into the culture. They think with the mind of the culture, not with the mind of the church. That was the situation. But you look at the bottom line, after everything Byrne did, and the things that we are rather proud of, such as the desegregation of Father Ryan and so forth, it's not, race relations has not been, for the Diocese of Nashville, our proudest moment. Now, I was ordained in '66. I was a priest before the Diocese of Nashville would even consider sponsoring an African-American man in the seminary. In other words, if a black boy, say he's a graduate of Ryan in 1965, that's in living memory. If he had applied to the Diocese of Nashville to go to the seminary, there would have been, on the questionnaire, there would have been a spot there for race. If he had put down black or Negro, whatever the language would have been at the time, he was out of the picture. The black parish in Memphis that Byrne started was run by the Franciscans. And they may still be there for all I know, but they were there for many years, up until rather recent times. And one of the pastors was from Chicago. He was African-American himself, Father James Like. He was a good friend of mine. And he was pastor there. And when he got there, and he would have been my age, so I assume he went there in the mid-70s. He used to talk about it all the time. He went through the files. And he found one letter after the other. He used to talk about it. He found one letter after the other to the bishop, whoever it may have been, of the Chancery Office officials, in which the pastor there was recommending an African-American boy for the seminary. And of course, the letter would come back, he's black, we don't take blacks. The nuns were the same way. There was a Catholic, a religious sister, a nun from Nashville. I don't know whether she's still alive or not, but in any event, she was from Nashville, St. Vincent's Parish. She applied, and she'd be my age, and I'm not 100 yet. She applied to 31 religious communities to join them as a religious, and they all said no. The Franciscan sisters in Milwaukee finally accepted her. Father Like, by the way, was in Memphis. He was rather young, and he was appointed auxiliary bishop of Cleveland. and served there until he was named Archbishop of Atlanta. And he very tragically developed cancer. And I was down in Atlanta. I went down there in February. I forget what year it was. He was Archbishop. I went down there and for a visit, and it was February. I remember, and he seemed to be fine. Well, something began to happen, and he was diagnosed. He went to St. Joseph's Hospital in Atlanta, and then he went to Sloan Kettering in New York. He couldn't do anything for him. He died the 26th of December. But back to Tennessee, he used to talk about it all the time, that African-American boys were rejected for the seminary. So the two things that I want to close with, I see we're running quite a bit along, John. Two
We
things
have until 11:30, Father.
Okay. One would be the distancing, the separation, legal or not. Certainly the legal set the stage, but legal or not, the distancing. And the separation, and then the distancing and not aware of it. Tonight on CNN, they're doing a special on Eleanor Roosevelt. She was, of course, very much a blue blood from the high society of New York, very wealthy. Somehow or another, she got involved in social work. When she did, this is not about blacks, but this would have been about immigrants. But she said when she did, she, coming from her privileged background, never knew, this is the quote from Eleanor Roosevelt, First Lady from 33 to 45. She said, "I never knew that human beings lived that way." I have a first cousin, born and reared in Nashville, person of enormous goodwill, and her husband was transferred to Manchester, New Hampshire. And so they moved there, bought a home. I visited, they've been guests in their home. Across the street, next door, are families, Italian from Boston. My cousin said it was an absolute eye-opener because she never, ever knew how Italians were persecuted in Boston. Never had any idea what they went through. But of course, it's very real to her neighbors because their grandparents went through it. Now, I want to tell you about the Black Lives Matter movement. I kind of understand some of that. My mother had a maid, and that was not uncommon. The people next door had a maid, and so forth. The Help, they called them. Remember the book that came out in Jackson, Mississippi? That's what you called them, The Help. Her name was Lula, and she came 6 days a week. She came at 8 o'clock in the morning, rode the bus, 8 o'clock in the morning. She could not go to the front door of the house because, see, the etiquette was blacks never, ever went to the front door. That's my lifetime. She'd come to the back door, and she was sort of the maid of all work. She was did all of the housework, laundry, vacuuming beds, cleaning the bathroom, whatever. Babysitter, mother was gone. And she was there through the evening meal. So that would mean, and of course, wash the dishes. So she would get off about 7:30. So she would work between 11 and 12 hours a day. Now the going, of course, there was no minimum wage, you see. The going wage for those people, listen to this, $3 a day. That's what she made. Now, if you count in, I looked it up last night, if you count in for inflation, she made $32 a day in our money. But that's 12 hours for $32. That's not that much money. Part of it, she got a quarter, 50 cents, a quarter for the bus to get there, and a quarter for the bus to get home. Now, speaking of Black Lives Matter and the police, she would finish evening meal. Mother would set the menu, and she'd decide tonight we're going to have roast beef or whatever it was. But anyway, Lula fixed it. And then Lula cleaned up. And then there was a question of her going home. Well, the issue was, and it was always a big thing to me because I would get to go with Dad and got away from homework. When the days got shorter, she would be going to the bus stop 2 blocks away in the dark in a white neighborhood. Well, that could not happen. Why? Because the police would pick her up. Black Lives Matter. That's Nashville, my lifetime. So why was it a big deal for me? It was an excuse to get away from homework, because Daddy would take her home. Well, under the etiquette, of course, of that time, he's a white man. He could never, ever, ever be alone with a Black woman. So I would go with him. And I'd sit in the front seat. Why didn't she sit in the front seat? Blacks could never occupy the same level of sitting as a white. That's my lifetime, Nashville, Tennessee. And we would take her home and then come on back. But it was to avoid an incident with the police, the Nashville police, Metro Police. It was to avoid, because she would have been suspected of being up to no good, being in a white neighborhood after dark. Now, I'm not making that up. That was life. Now, I'm 80 years old. Not many people remember that who are white. But Blacks remember it because their parents would tell them about it. I don't remember when Al Smith ran for president in 28, but I've heard an awful lot about it because it was the first time my father ever voted, and he had to put up with the anti-Catholicism. So anyway, we've gone 54 minutes. John, is this what you had in mind?
This has been great, Monsignor. We might have folks who have some questions.
Have any questions? I see Jim O'Hara looking at me. Anybody have any questions?
Jim, you're muted.
Let me just make a comment. The power of your personal testament, Monsignor, of what damage the distancing in our own faith community has done over the years is powerful. Thank you.
Yes. And I just stressed that with you.
Hey, John and Father Monsignor.
Yeah.
While this presentation was going on, history was made in the United States. Francis made Wilton Gregory a cardinal, the first Black cardinal in the United States.
Oh, listen, I was so delighted. We've been friends for years. This morning I thought I'm going to Rome to see Wilton, and then I found out we won't let Americans into Italy. He was a great friend to lighten the conversation. He was a classmate in the seminary and a great friend of Bishop Chobe. And there was a group of them, Archbishop Listecki of Milwaukee and a couple of them. Well, anyway, Chobe would go up to him. I'd be at a meeting reporting for the Visitor, and Chobe'd be there as Bishop of Nashville, and we'd run into Archbishop Gregory, and Toby would say, "Now, what is your name? Is it Wilbur or Walter or Walden? What is your name?" Well, I've gotten so now, when I see him, I think, "What is your name?" It's he's a fine man, and I was delighted. So it is historic. He's the first American black cardinal.
I have a question in the chat from Steve Meyer, who says, "I thought Tennessee voted more than once on whether to secede."
It did. It voted on a convention and it failed. I mean, the resolution to secede failed. Yes. And many of these counties that I mentioned voted for the Union. And then what tipped the balance, not only in Tennessee, but in other states that had not seceded, which would have been North Carolina, Virginia, Tennessee, Arkansas. What tipped the balance was Lincoln's call for troops to suppress what he called the rebellion. Yes, there were two votes. The first one failed, and then after there was this surge of opinion throughout the South, not only Tennessee. You know, East Tennessee voted for the Union. One county in East Tennessee, Sullivan, which is Kingsport, one county in East Tennessee voted to secede. All the others voted for the Union. But then you come west, and here and there, I mentioned Macon and Wayne, a couple in West Tennessee, I think Carroll County. But anyway, it was a landslide in the rest of the state. Anybody else?
Hey, Monsignor, this is Gino. You may have told me that the yellow brick the cathedral has and other buildings throughout Tennessee that Bishop Byrne was instrumental in, that the brick is known as Bishop Byrne brick or something along those lines, a yellow, pale yellow brick.
Gino, he was not an architect, but he was everything but. He got Christian Asmus, I think was his name, who was a prominent Nashville architect who designed the cathedral. But it was, he just decided where the joints would meet, and the nails were driven, because Byrne specified the ceiling at the cathedral is one thing that is an exact replica of San Martino in Rome, but it had to copy it in every respect. And as I said, it's been remodeled. Bishop Adrian came in. The crucifixion scene, that was not original, and so forth and so on. And then Bishop Niedegazes remodeled it, and Chobe did a lot of remodeling. So, but anyway, it's a fascinating story. Another thing, Gino, it's one of the first big buildings in Nashville built of steel.
Good, thanks.
So,
Loved hearing you this morning.
Pardon me?
Loved hearing you this morning.
Oh, you read that thing I sent you yesterday.
I did. Thank you.
But anyway, John, this has been fun. I hope it was what you wanted.
I think so. I have at least one more question if you have a minute.
Sure.
So obviously this history is not one that many Catholics in Nashville know. Many of our priests don't know this history, the history of our own diocese. Can you envision ways that might ever change?
Well, I think one thing that is an issue is that time is moving. I think this distancing has a perspective in terms of time. And I see that evidenced in some of the things that are going on at the moment with the Black Lives Matter, the distancing is not, I won't say it's mean-spirited, it's not deliberate. Say the young priests that are coming out, they're very, very good-hearted, and they certainly are not racist, but they don't have the memory, some of those memories that I can associate with. In terms of the civil rights movement, they would have no knowledge of that. And that's not to insult them. I mean, they're just not old enough. But when I got to Baltimore, you know, the city was just on fire. Not literally, but it was at one time. But about civil rights. They would have no sense of that and of those figures of that time. And that's not to say they are not good-hearted, but generations have passed. We just don't understand it. And the humiliation that blacks experienced, we have no connection with. Like my cousin in New Hampshire has no idea what Italians went through in Boston 75 years ago. That's part of it. And I don't know how but I will tell you this, African Americans is part of their lore. These things are all very real. Like for my father, who lived for many years after 1928 in the Smith election, that was a part of his life because he was a young man and went through those insults and those humiliations when Smith ran for president. And young whites, I don't think, had that kind of experience. I'll just, I guess we should close, John, but I'll just give you another example. I was, I don't know, a junior or senior or something at Ryan. Father Francis Shea was the principal. That was long before Geno's day, but he was the principal. Later went on to be Bishop of Evansville, Indiana. Well, they got a call, he did, from Cameron High School out there right off of Lafayette. I think it's still in operation, isn't it? But whatever. And they wanted to have a panel of students, wanted Ryan to be a part of it, to talk about desegregation because we had experienced it. Well, Father Shea, before he called me in, he called my father and he said, "Now, Owen, I don't want to, I just want you to know what is they want, and I don't want to approach your son until I talk to you." So my father said, "Well, Father, whatever you want to do is fine with me." So Father Shea called me in and said, "I want you to go out there and appear on this panel." Well, he asked one of my classmates. So the plan was that we would rendezvous at Ryan down there on Ellison Place. And my mother and the other student's mother and the student and myself would drive to Cameron. Well, we drove the entire way with this lady who was a fine person. She preached the whole way about how terrible desegregation was. We got to Cameron, pulled up, and you would have thought we were the President of the United States or the Queen of England or something, the way they welcomed us. So we went in, appeared on the panel, drove back to Ryan. The lady preached all the way. So got home that night at dinner. Mother said, I guess Mother would have been 50 at whatever at the time. She said late 40s or something. She said, "Never in my life have I shaken hands with a black person until today," because the principal had extended his hand to her, and that was absolutely unacceptable. Well, she shook hands with him, but she said it was first time in her life. Another thing that is interesting is that she knew that if she told her friends, Catholic friends, ladies of charity or whatever it would have been, they would have felt that was very inappropriate for me or for her to allow me to be on the stage with blacks. That's my memory. So that's sort of sharing with you some memories, John.
Appreciate that. All right, well, we are at time. So Monsignor, thank you so much. We look forward to learning about Bishop Durick next week.
Let me just ask before we go off, Jim, do you remember Bishop Durick? You would have been down the line.
I do well. I and a number of other guys from Father Ryan served the various bishops who came into town for his installation.
Oh, well, that really goes back. Gino, do you remember him?
Yeah, I was at Cathedral during his installation, what, 64, I guess?
Oh, I tell you. Well, you two, you're both young men, but anyway, Christ the King parishioners, it's been wonderful to be with you.
Thank you, Monsignor.
Thank you, Monsignor.
Thank you, Monsignor.
Thanks.
Okay. John, I'll be in touch with you during the week.
Very
All
good.
right.
Thank you all.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you, Monsignor.
Uh-huh.